Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of Perfectly Untrue. I'm pretty nervous, I'm not gonna lie. I don't know, this is my first podcast, so I'm pretty new to everything and, I'm not really sure how everything works. So if this episode is pretty rocky at first, I am so sorry. I'm just trying to get into the swing of things, but yeah. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Asia Au-Yeung. I'll be the host for today's episode and the main host as the series progresses. So this is the first episode, Perfect True. So I guess let's kind of delve into what perfect true means first. So perfect is kind of this idea that, everything is a utopia. Everything that you must do needs to come across as perfect, whether this be exemplified through your school, through your studies, through extracurriculars. I'm sure we've all had that moment where, we're kind of like sitting back and we're just like, yeah, I need to do this to my absolute perfection. And the whole point of this podcast is basically to break those feelings down and what is deemed as perfect in society and break it down from a youth perspective and kind of understand, why is it that we feel that way? And also, how can we aim to unveil this? So in today's episode, we're basically just going to be breaking down, the allure of materialistic values, how one feels through academic validation, and how that really affects someone. Even myself, I'm not even sure how to really articulate it because those are such huge subjects. Every single person experiences it differently. So I'm going to be talking about a little bit from my own personal perspective, what perfect is and how I aimed to try to strive for this idea of perfection. And how it ultimately ended up kind of really affecting me as a person. So yeah, those are some pretty big themes that we're going to get into here. So just a heads up, I know it's a huge topic, but we're going to try our best to kind of unveil those truths behind it and kind of just go a little bit more in depth about everything. So we'll start off with part 1, which is The Office. I know that's a pretty daunting title. But yeah, let me just get into it. So yeah, The Office. The reason why part 1 is named that is because that's primarily where I spent most of my childhood, was in an office or in a webinar or, in a seminar or something like that. Something in that space, just something in, the business space. I was just always kind of surrounded by that, growing up. And I know that definitely contrasted a lot of my peers. When I would look at them, they would think, oh, what are you going to, so late at night? I remember it would be 9 p.m., 8 p.m., 10 p.m. And I know that, you're thinking, oh, that's not late. What are you talking about? I was thinking, 1 a.m. Well, considering I was around, 4 or 5, 10 p.m. for, a little 4-year-old to be sitting in an office all day is a little weird, no? I don't know. I feel like it's just a little odd. But yeah, that was primarily where a lot of my childhood was spent, was just in an office. And the reason because of that was my dad was an entrepreneur. He was in a lot of different multi-level marketing companies, stuff like that, really involved in business. And he was really trying to, set himself in the industry. And a lot of the times, I would follow him with my mom, and I remember I would just be sitting in these office spaces, and I wouldn't really know what to do, and I would kind of just let my mind wander. And I'd be just I'd grab a napkin maybe, or some notebook, or some business card on the side, and I'd just start doodling on it. And, that was really where a lot of my formative years came from. And because, I would spend all this time in some random office or in a webinar or seminar or a meeting would be going on and I'd just kind of be in the lounge or, they put me wherever kind of thing. I'd just be waiting there. I just spent a lot of time in those spaces. That's where primarily I was. So I had to learn from a really young age kind of how to keep myself entertained. I am an only child. I do have a stepbrother and a stepsister, but our age gap is pretty pretty intense, pretty severe. So, they wouldn't be living at home with us. Like, they already had their own places and everything like that. So, a lot of the times it would just be me and myself and my little notepad or business card or whatever the heck I'd be doing, right? So I would spend a lot of time just filling up time on my own. Whether that be drawing, whether that be video games, what a kid does. And a lot of the time I found myself like watching a lot of YouTube during this time. I'm sure a lot of us did. Watching a lot of YouTube, watching TV shows a lot of the times, movies and stuff like that. I was like super, super into Disney, Nickelodeon, like all of that. And I would see these shows like, let's say, I don't know, let me think off the top of my head, like Victorious. Victorious was huge for me growing up. I freaking loved Victorious. Victorious was awesome. And just like a lot of family vlog channels and stuff like that. I was also super into like Minecraft and everything like that. But in a lot of these videos, they would be really happy-go-lucky. Like, they're videos that are geared towards children. So that makes sense. But a lot of these Nickelodeon or Disney spin-off shows or like whatever, right? They would show this kind of ideal family. And I remember one family that was like a staple for me and that I was so excited to watch this show was the Thundermans. I love the Thundermans. And what was a little weird was like I know a lot of people grew up with like iCarly or Liv and Maddie and like those kind of shows. Love those shows too. I thought those were awesome. But the show that I really was super excited to see was just the Thundermans. I don't know why. And Henry Danger. I was just super into like those superhero shows and I thought it was like the whole concept was just crazy cool. So I'm kind of getting off topic, but let me go back to the main point. So the Thundermans. And the Thundermans, for those who haven't watched it, is, I think it's American. It's an American family, I'm not sure. But it's this family that basically they live a double life. So they're superheroes sometimes, and then they're also just a regular family, and each of them have like their own powers. I think one of them had like laser eyes or something. I'm pretty sure the dad had super strength. Someone had like a speed ability. But that was the whole point of the show. So basically they were these superheroes at night or like whenever there was a mission, and then they were this normal family. And the whole show kind of, was set in stone about this normal family and how they came together at the end of the day, and there was a sense of camaraderie, there was a sense of unity. And that was really cool to see. And, they lived in this kind of like ideal home as well, white picket fence, just this ideal household. And you could tell each of them really had a strong connection. And that was something I really resonated with as a kid. And honestly, something that I really wanted for myself as well. I'm really grateful for my family. I love each and every one of them. And they mean the world to me. But I didn't really have that growing up. Like, a lot of the times my parents would be quite distant from one another. Like, affection wouldn't really be shown in our household. And I think that comes with, having an Asian immigrant family. Like, I'm second generation. So that's a little bit of background behind that. But yeah, like, it was just, affection wasn't really shown in our household. We didn't really have like those stereotypical family things that you would see in like these Disney shows. Like, I never got a game night, or I was never going for like movie nights with my family kind of thing. And that was a little weird for me growing up because I would see in these shows and these TV shows like these families would be having like family game night, they'd be doing whatever, and then I'd be in this webinar room. I'd be in this cold, dreary webinar room while my dad was giving a presentation and my mom was like, obviously listening to what he had to say and everything. And I thought, that was our family connection. That was our time for us to bond and have unity. But because I never really saw like the family game night thing, and because there was such a difference, I think that definitely cemented a sense of like urgency in me as a child. And what I mean by that is like, I always saw my dad working super hard. He was always in these webinars, he was always trying to sell a new thing, or working on the next big project or whatever. And my mom was like an incredible hard worker. Like, she was practically a single mom. Like, she was doing all the chores at home. She was taking care of me just like single-handedly, because my dad would always be out for work. And, you know, I would see her working so hard. And my mom now, like, she has a full-time job. Like, she's working super hard, like, day and night. And I would just see, like, wow, my parents are working so hard. And, you know, they kind of instilled in me this idea of perfection, this path for success. And basically it would be like, you know, keep your head down, you know, work really hard, you know, like, make sure you have good grades, you're like this model student, and, you know, you're living up to the expectation, you know, this golden rule, like, this, there's a saying for this, like, rule of thumb, the golden rule of thumb. And it was just like, you know, work really hard, cement yourself in life, and make sure you strive for success every single day. Every single day is a new day. And I remember my mom would say this all the time. Like, if, let's say, you know, because we all go through bad things. Like, she would say, let's say you're having a bad day, right? You know, you come home from school and, like, you got a bad test result or something. And it would always just be like, suck it up, you know, get your crap together. We don't have time for that. If you're not dead and you can still work and you can still get up for the next day, then that's not an excuse. Because if you're dead or you're sick or whatever, you can't do anything. But as long as you have the privilege of, like, still being alive, basically, you should work your butt off and you should make sure that every single day counts. So that was kind of like, you know, how I grew up, was every single day you want to strive for something new. Every single day, you know, you want to achieve 100%. And if you're already going 100%, you want to achieve 101%, 110%. You can go 200. Like, I remember my mom would, like, always say that, like, if you're going for 100, go for 200, because you can always go for that 200. And if you're already at a 200%, then go for 300. Like, the bar was just always being raised, you know, like, if you think you're already going your full capacity, there's always room for more. So constantly, like, I would just, you know, I would try to aim for that, and I would always try to strive for perfection. Like, I would always do more. And yeah, like, I think my upbringing definitely diverged from most people my age. But even if that was the case, they kind of set me up for success in a way. Like, they just made sure that I was always on top of things. I was this model student, and they never really had to worry about things, because that was my mindset growing up. And I kind of took it into my school career as well. I took it into work. I took it into, like, literally every single day. Every single day is a new day, and you give it 100%, because you don't know if you're going to wake up the next day, kind of thing. And there was kind of this mutual understanding in my family that that was the idea. So it was like, even though we didn't have these family game nights, even though we didn't have these movie nights, you know, this perfect ideal household that would be seen in the television screen, or, you know, in these Disney productions or whatever, like, we kind of had almost like an alliance with each other, just a mutual understanding of, like, we are all working hard as a unit, and we are all working hard together. And although, you know, I didn't get a lot of things growing up, like, you know, those family game nights or those movie nights, or, like, I remember a lot of the times, like, in middle school specifically, like, we hadn't had a family dinner really at all. Like, I remember, like, when dinner was made, you know, we would take it into our rooms and we would eat it ourselves, and it'd be like this thing. But there was never really time for us to, like, collectively grow as a family. And I feel like that was definitely something I was missing growing up. But I definitely knew that, you know, at the end of the day, they're my parents, and they want me to work hard. They want me to have success. They want the best for me. And that was something that I definitely just knew growing up. That was something that I had a really strong understanding of. So circling back, kind of into just everything, like, circling back into, you know, my dad being an entrepreneur, you know, being in these multi-level marketing companies, I would see him striving for perfection, and I would see my mom doing the same thing. And that was something that was instilled into me growing up. And I remember, like, I wanted to just be like him. Like, I would see him in these webinars and I'd be like, oh my God, I want to be like that. So I remember specifically, like, a really core memory was when I was in, like, second grade, maybe. I'm not even sure. Second grade, there was a craft fair. And, everyone was getting ready for this craft fair. It was like a big thing, it was the time for us to like finally show our thing. And I remember being so strategic about it. So it was a Christmas craft fair, and I had decided to sell ornaments. And basically what I did is I ran a survey throughout the entire school. And, I got to know like everyone's favorite shows, like what was going on at the time. So were people really into Minecraft, or like was there a specific Disney show that was like popping off at the time, or like that kind of thing, right? So I surveyed, and I remembered like the top two was like Minecraft and Finding Nemo and like Finding Dory. Like people really wanted that, so I made these Finding Nemo, like these Nemo ornaments, these Dory ornaments, and then like creepers and like Endermen and like all of that kind of thing. And yeah, like I just made these ornaments, and I was like so prepared to sell them, and I was like, I'm gonna sell these all, like no matter what, I'm gonna sell these all. I'm gonna be just like my dad. It's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be great. And I ended up selling them all. Like it sold out. It was great. I think I sold out in like 20 minutes. But looking back, like it was so crazy to me, because I would implement all of these like small little strategies that you wouldn't think that a literal second grader would implement. And what I mean by this is like, running the survey, that's basically figuring out your target demographic and then selling it. That was basically what my dad was doing. He was selling products and everything like that. So the fact that I was able to pick up on that quick as a child, I think really shows how that mentality of, for success was instilled into me at such a young age. And, it just kept going. And as I grew older, like I found myself becoming more interested in the arts. So, I created an art Instagram account, and I just drew nonstop, and I had these commissions, and I built out a whole commission board, and I'd like draw every single day, and I'd be like, here are my commissions, like promoting them nonstop. I would do like draw this in your styles, which I'm not sure if people really know what that is, but basically it would be like a bigger Instagram artist, and they would like do a piece, and basically their whole thing was like, okay, draw this in your style. So I would just do a bunch of different things to just get my account out there, whether this be art trades or draw this in your style, or like commissions, or like just posting daily. Like I would do anything just to get my Instagram account up there, right? And just like drawing until ungodly hours. Like I would draw until like 3 a.m. or like whatever, right? And I also like promoted myself on Discord servers and just anywhere I could promote myself, Twitter, Instagram, everything. And no matter what it was, like I put my 100% into the craft. So whether it was, selling Christmas ornaments in the second grade, or whether it was, wanting to promote myself on Instagram as an artist, or, dance even, or even this podcast, like I would try everything I could to put my 100% in it. And this was definitely because of, how I grew up, and this mentality of like, you got to put your all or nothing. Like if it's not perfection, if it's not perfect, then it's not worth putting up there. And I think I definitely, took this mindset into my high school career as well. So as I grew up, I just kept trying to find ways to work harder. I kept trying to find ways to be better. And, my family being first generation immigrants, like they also had this mindset as well. So everyone was just like, striving for this idea of perfection. And throughout my high school career specifically, I took this into my high school career as well. So what I mean by this is, I was just putting my 100%. I joined all these different clubs. I joined all these extracurriculars, like all these executive organizations, provincial, national executive organizations. And I was kind of just following in my parents' footsteps. And I remember I even tried to like create my own startups or mini businesses or whatever. And I'm really proud of like, what I've created and the communities that I've joined. Like that's without a doubt. But I definitely overloaded myself in doing this as well, just to become this ideal person kind of thing. I remember at one point I was in like 12 different executive organizations. I think I was in like 6 clubs, and I was also balancing, being pretty good student at the time. Like, I remember I got A pluses pretty consistently, or just like straight A's quite a lot. And yeah, that was just my life for a really long time, is just go at 100%, like do everything you can. And you yourself, like things like your health, or things like, I don't know, hobbies or something like that, that's secondary. Like, you want to admit this idea that you are this idea of this perfect person, this idea of perfection. So yeah, that concludes our first part, The Office, kind of just talking about how I grew up, what the mentality was growing up, how that kind of cemented how I would think for the rest of my high school career, and how did I carry myself in life moving forward. So yeah, those formative years, just like being in those office rooms and being in those webinars and seeing my parents work so hard. And even though I didn't get this ideal family household, I kind of knew, like, this is where I'm meant to be. I'm meant to, like, make a mark in this world, and I'm about to do it 100% or nothing. So yeah, that's the first part. That is the first part. So moving into part 2, the chase. So during high school, in my 11th grade, I joined the International Baccalaureate program, and I had a lot of conflicting feelings going to this program. I remember, I kind of joined not for the right reasons. I joined the program because, I felt like I needed to prove myself in a way. All the smart kids were in the IB program, and I had done honors previously to that in 10th grade, and I remember I wanted to join the IB program just because I wanted this idea of perfection, 100% or nothing. And, going into it, I thought that was what I needed, like landing a good spot in a good university was kind of every parent's dream. And I really wanted the prestige of someone to look at me and say, wow, like that girl, like she's got it all together. Like she knows what she's doing. She's in all these executive organizations. She's in all these clubs. She's in all this whatnot. And she's in the IB program as well. And the IB program for me was kind of just like this cherry on top. Like, yes, she's got her shit together, basically. So yeah, and I really wanted my parents to see me and kind of look at me and go, wow, yeah, that's our daughter. Like, that's someone that we can truly be proud of. And for the most part, I thought I was going down that path, and I thought that I had achieved that. And for a while, I think that worked. I got what I wanted. Like, I was maintaining my grades. I was balancing everything pretty well. And, I got this idea of perfection. I definitely got what I was hoping for, in the way where it's like, I think for a while, in a lot of people's eyes, I was someone that they could look up to. Like, I was someone who they saw as an inspiration. You see this girl, she's in like 12 executive organizations, she's in 6 different clubs, she's in the IB program, she has like, I was doing like dance at the time too, and just a bunch of different things. And at the time, I definitely got what I wanted, and I was really happy with that, and I was really content for a long time. But balancing everything was just not as easy as it looks. I remember, I would come to school every day, and I would try to exude this image like, yeah, I got this. I got everything together. But in reality, like, I was so stressed. I remember, I had like 12 different assignments every single day. Every single day there was something to be done. If not for school, then like for whatever organization I was in or whatever club I was in, right? There's always something to do. And even though I seemed put together on the outside, I was definitely overloaded with so much work, so many different things. Like, it was just so much, 100%. And I didn't really know what to do for a really long time. Like, I could barely keep up. And not to mention with school and everything, as the grade 11 year progressed, things just got heavier and things just got harder in terms of workload. And a lot of the executive organizations I was in, let me give a little context, and also for the IB program as well. I realize I've been talking about it for so long, but I never actually like said what it is. So the IB program is this 2-year long program. It's called the International Baccalaureate program. And basically, it's in a day 1, day 2 schedule. So you're balancing around, I think it's 11 to 12 courses, including things like CAS or TOK. And it's constantly like that. So it's super demanding in terms of workload. And then at the end of the year, you have your exams. So, you know, that's like 80% to 75% of your grade, I'm pretty sure. And it's like this big stressful time. And alongside with that, you have these things called IAs and IOs. And it's like these big projects where you're just writing like these long series of essays about a bunch of different topics, right? So as the grade 11 year progressed, work was definitely piling up. You know, there was the next IA to do, or the next IO, or maybe I was studying for an exam. And a lot of my extracurriculars were like this as well. So I was in these executive organizations, and a lot of them would be for conferences or big events. So let's say, for example, I was in business case conference teams. So at the end of the year or at a specific time, there would be a huge conference leading up, right? And, you know, throughout the year, it's not too bad. You have your tasks, you have your whatnot. But at the end, it's just like, boom, you have all this work coming up, the big conference is coming up, and, you know, you have a bunch of different background guides to do, or you have a lot of marketing stuff to do, or whatever it might be, right? And with IB, I definitely didn't know how to manage the large amount of workload alongside with these huge conferences that was happening. And I found myself getting more and more overwhelmed as things continued. You know, I was barely getting any sleep, and I found myself honestly just working myself to the bone. Like, I'd just be working nonstop until like crazy hours. And I remember for a long time, like, my sleep schedule was horrible. Like, I remember, you know, I'd get home from school and I'd be so exhausted. I'd probably just like lay around or take a nap or whatever until like 6 p.m. And then I would have dinner, and then I would start studying around like 7 or 8ish, and I would study from 7 and 8 until like 12. And then this was like during exam season. I would sleep until maybe like 2 a.m., wake up at 2 a.m., and then study from 2 a.m. until like the next school day, like until 6 a.m. or something, or until 7 a.m., take a quick nap, and then go to school. Like, my schedule was absolutely insane, and I had no time for myself. Like, I found myself kind of in this routine, and I was going into this routine, and I was like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm working myself to the bone every day. You know, I'm getting up every day. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm in all these extracurriculars. And yeah, sure, like, I got what I wanted. I got this idea of perfection. I got this idea that, you know, I have all my crap together and I know what I'm doing. But what is it all for? Like, what really is the end goal? And yeah, sure, like, you could say, well, the end goal is, you know, to get into an amazing university and to do all these amazing things. But when I was stuck in that cycle of just constantly working on the next executive thing, or constantly working on the next assignment, or IA or IO, I found myself wondering a lot of the time, is it really all worth it? Like, is this really what I want? And, you know, I really began to question, like, I got the ideal image of what I wanted, and I got what kind of like everyone strived for. But was it really worth it if I was like miserable? Because I remember, you know, I'd get home at the end of the day, or I'd finish my assignment, and I'd just sit there, and I would feel like empty. And I would just look around, and I'd be like, yeah, wow, I got all these assignments done. And maybe it was like good for maybe 2 seconds. I got that serotonin rush, you know. But like, I didn't feel great about it at the end of the day. Like, I didn't feel like it was a huge milestone, you know. I went through my tasks, I kind of lived through the day, but it just felt like I was living day by day. And I just, like, you know, it was hard. Like, it definitely wasn't easy, and I worked myself to the bone for it, and I got the results I wanted because of that. But I was really just questioning for a really long time, whether or not it was worth it. And when you start to get in this cycle, when you start to question the things around you, exterior things, or at least for me personally, exterior things started to entice me more. And, I would look at my other peers who weren't in the IB program, and I would look at my other peers who, didn't have as much of a workload as me, weren't in 12 executive organizations for sure, or weren't in as many clubs or whatever. And they would still be really accomplished people, they would still have their own things going for them, whether, it be dance or whether it be their own club or their own interests. Like, they had their things going for them. But they seemed content. And that was the difference between me and them, is they seemed like, even though, they had their routine, at the end of the day, they could go home and they could feel content with themselves, and they could feel satisfied, and they could feel fulfilled at the end of the day. But for me, it would be weird. Like, it would be this conflicting feeling, because it'd be like, yeah, I got done, like, the 10 tasks that I had to do for my executive organization, or, like, I got done my 3 assignments, or my project, or whatever, or my next IO, or my IA, I prepped everything. But then I'd be, like, not satisfied with myself at the end of the day. I wouldn't feel fulfilled. Even though I got all this work done, I wouldn't really be happy with the end result. But I would see my peers, and they would get done one thing, or they had one good day, and they'd be like, I'm happy with today. And I really wanted that. And, it made me question, like, if those people have it all together and they're not doing a million different things, then why can't I be like them? Like, I started to question, if they're so happy and I had chosen this life, and I know going into it, I knew, I had chosen the IB program. I had chosen this route, this path for myself. I'd chosen to load myself with all these extracurriculars. Like, I knew that it was my responsibility, and it was a responsibility that I had taken for myself, and it was a responsibility that, only I put myself in this position. But even knowing that, like, I still felt guilt for it, and I looked around at all these other people, and I was like, wow, I really just want to be happy. Like, that's all I really want, is just to feel content in the way that they do, and just be okay with themselves at the end of the day. And I would just be in this routinely cycle, and I honestly just feel really crap. Like, I'd feel really empty at the end of the day. And I felt like a fraud for a really long time. Because I remember, on the outside, maybe I was exuding this idea of confidence. Or on the outside, maybe I seemed like, I had it all together. Or, it's kind of like this thing, like, when you see someone's social media page, they look super happy, they have it all together. And this is because we're exuding our best selves on social media, or, we're portraying the best version of ourselves. And that's kind of what I was portraying to people when I met them, or when I saw them, or when I was in school. I would try to portray the best version of myself. I seemed like I had it all together. But in reality, like, when I would come home at the end of the day, or when I would just be with myself, I felt like that definitely wasn't the case. I felt like there was a million things going on in my brain at all times. I felt super overwhelmed, and I felt like a fraud. Like, I felt like even though I got all this praise and I got all these accolades, it didn't really mean anything at the end of the day, because I wasn't happy with myself. And I never knew, like, when would be the end. Like, when would I finally be happy with myself? When would I finally feel satisfied? And I got to this point where it's like, well, if I'm never going to be satisfied, and I'm never going to be happy with myself, then, like, fuck it. Like, why am I still doing this? There's no point of fixing this, or trying to strive for perfection, or, go down this path of success if I'm not happy, if I'm not content. And at that point, I was just like, well, screw it. Why am I doing this then? It doesn't really make any sense. And I know, like, that's not the best mindset to have, but that's definitely the place I was at in this time. Like, I was in this routinely cycle, and I wanted a way out of it. I wanted a way to kind of break free from it all. And that's when I started to meet others. And these people that I was kind of surrounding myself with, you know, they didn't really have definite or concrete goals. Granted, like, they were really great people as friends, but to themselves, like, they weren't the kindest. But even knowing that, I would see them, and even though, you know, they didn't have everything all together, they didn't have this idea of perfection or this role model kind of, I guess, outlook on things. Like, you know, people definitely didn't look at them and they were like, yeah, this is who I want to be. But they still seemed happy. And that was something I wanted for myself, was I just wanted to feel happy. I just wanted to feel satisfied, and I just wanted to feel content. And being with these people, you know, it seemed like they didn't have a care in the world. Like, you know, they seemed like they were just happy, just as is. Even though, you know, things weren't all together and things weren't perfect, they were okay with that. And I think for a really long time, I felt free with them. You know, I felt a sense of comfort that I never really knew before. And, you know, I started to participate in activities that weren't the best for my health, or, like, just definitely weren't the best influence on me. And even though, you know, a part of me knew that this path that I built for myself, this path for success, it was kind of crumbling around me. Like, I was definitely losing sight of my goals, and everything that I had built up, you know, this idea of perfection, this role model student, you know, this person that you would look at, you'd be like, yeah, she's got her crap together. This idea and this illusion that I put up for myself was kind of breaking apart. And I knew that. But for the first time in a really, really long time, I felt okay. And I felt free, and I felt comforted, and I felt wanted, and I felt satisfied. And that was something I hadn't gotten in a long time. Like, since maybe I was, like, probably a kid. You know, when you're running around, you're 2 years old, you have no care in the world. And for once, I felt like things were going to be okay. And at that point, I was like, you know what? Even though I don't have this illusion built up that I'm this perfect person, like, I felt okay. And at that point, I was like, well, does this idea of perfection even really matter? Because I'm happy for once. And at this point, you know, like, I thought I knew what was good for me. I thought I knew, you know, what was best for me. And even though I was finding happiness in, you know, not the best influences, not the best things for myself, at that time, I felt a sense of comfort with it. And I felt okay. And I think that was a moment in time where I just realized I'd rather have this than this idea of perfection. And I felt like I wasn't living my life for someone else. Because this whole time, you know, growing up, whether it be to impress friends or impress my family members or impress whoever, like, I always felt I was living my life for someone else. Or even like a university, right? I felt like I was going through the motions, going through the cycle of completing all these assignments, being in all these executive organizations so that I could achieve this kind of American dream. I'm Canadian, but besides the point. This dream and this ideal life of, you know, one day I'm going to come out of university with a really good job and I'm going to make my parents happy and I'm going to have this ideal life. But I always felt like a fraud in it, and I always felt so much guilt for it because I felt like I was never really doing it for myself. I felt like I was always doing it for someone else. And even if there was no one really, like, there was no one holding me at gunpoint being like, yes, like, you know, do all these things, be in all these organizations, like, I felt like just the idea itself of knowing that I could be perfect and I could get there and I could strive for that 101%, even though I was already going full speed at 100%, that idea was enough to shatter me. And because I was always striving for that idea of perfection, I was never really just living in the present, and I was never really just living in the moment. And when I found comfort in other influences and other things and other people, that definitely weren't the best for my mental health or me, but I felt this sense of comfort. I realized, like, I'd rather have that than this illusion that I was building around myself, this facade almost. Yeah, so I felt like this was fine, you know, a little fun is completely okay. But in doing that, you know, I started to lose myself. And I definitely started to lose everything that I worked towards. I stopped putting care in my studies, you know, the executive organization and all my passions, like, for example, dance that I worked so hard for, suddenly weren't that important to me. And I think that's definitely due to a lot of the people I surrounded myself with at that time. And I definitely lost sight of what was ahead of me. And during this time as well, like, my relationship with my family definitely worsened. We were kind of a little rocky at this point. And, you know, I started to get in more fights with my parents. You know, we were constantly bickering and arguing because I wasn't performing at this perfect level. You know, I wasn't performing at 100% at all times. And that definitely got to me. Like 1,000%. That definitely got to me. Because, you know, I'd come home and I'd realize, like, oh, I got a C on this assignment, or I did really bad on this thing, or I'm like 10 tasks behind in my organizations. And even though, you know, a part of me didn't really care, it bothered me that people were seeing me in another light now. That I wasn't this idea of perfection. I was no longer this inspiration to them. And, you know, this was when really close friends of mine too, people that I hold in really high regards, the friendships that I built around me, like, were slowly kind of slipping through my fingers. And I started indulging in, like, materialistic things just to feel that feeling of serotonin that, you know, I have everything all together. And, like, just trying to still exude this image of perfection when things were just not going my way. And life around me was kind of just slowly crumbling apart, and I was prioritizing, like, momentary fun, or, like, just this slight bit of serotonin, or 2 seconds I'll be okay if I just do this, or I hang out with these people, or whatever, just to feel something. And I think in that moment, like, I was just looking for anything and everything that would just make me feel like I had my crap together again. Just because, you know, I no longer felt that comfort in that space. I originally, you know, started to indulge in all these bad influences, I guess you could say, or, like, materialistic things, because it gave me a sense of comfort and it made me feel like I was okay. But as that feeling slowly started to diminish, I started to find, like, the next big thing, or the next thing that would make me feel something, like, make me feel okay. But that just never came, and that just, like, slowly just crumbled my self-esteem. Like, I know that's really depressing to say, but yeah, definitely I was in a really low point. And, you know, with my relationships worsening, not only with my platonic friendships, but also with my family, that definitely was a huge hit on my ego, that people were starting to see me differently. So yeah, it was a really rough time. I was just, like, you know, with myself, with my thoughts, and I was like, wow, so this is what things have become. So for this next part, fight or flight, I'm gonna go a little more in depth about how things were for me at this time, how at this moment in my life I really hit rock bottom. You know, I started to indulge in more materialistic things, and just things that definitely weren't good for me. I can't really go too into depth, but you probably have a general idea of what was happening to me during this time. And it was just not the greatest, you know. I definitely felt my self-esteem crumbling. Mentally, I was at an all-time low. Like, I would look in the mirror and I honestly didn't even know who I was. And I was really sad. I was really depressed. And I was back in this cycle of day-to-day living, just get through the day. And I was so confused of, how did I end up here? Because the whole point of, experiencing these new things, meeting these new people, engaging in these different activities or whatever, right, was to get out of that day-to-day cycle. So why was I still there? That was my whole thing. And I slowly started to see, the relationships around me kind of crumble. And that was a really hard moment in my life, for sure. I started to get into way more fights with my family. Things were really hard at home for a long time. We definitely didn't see eye to eye. And keeping in mind, my family was this really strict kind of like Asian household, kind of what I talked about in the first part of like, you needed to have everything together. You needed to be working at 100% at all times. And the fact that I wasn't, I knew in a sense, I wasn't really living up to that expectation. And this idea that I crafted for myself that, I wanted to be this perfect daughter that they could be proud of, that was slowly slipping through my fingers. And I think for a long time during this period, as fights worsened, as things got worse, I felt like my home wasn't really safe. So for this next part, I'm going to refer to some notes because it's a little personal for me. And this part is definitely a little more heavy, so just keep that in mind. But my home kind of became a place that I no longer felt safe in. I felt for a long time that I was kind of trapped in this endless cycle. And an incident happened that I won't go too far into detail for not only legal reasons, but also just for my own privacy. But due to such, like, I just no longer felt safe in my own home. I felt like the people that, I once confided in were no longer okay for me to confide in. I felt like my family was no longer people that I could trust. And for a long, long time, I just felt empty. I felt like there was nowhere I could go to, no place I really felt was home. And I mean that in a literal sense and also like a more metaphorical sense. Like I felt like, there was nowhere really safe for me to go in terms of like confiding in people and feeling like comfortable just with myself and the people that were around me. And in my household, like, typical Asian household, a lot of names were being thrown. For a long time I had a really complex relationship with my mom and my dad as well. Like, during this time I'd be slut shamed a lot, or not the nicest things were said to me, for sure. And for a long time, I felt really degraded, and I felt really humiliated. And I felt for a long time that things weren't okay, Things weren't all right, and I knew things weren't all right. And I knew that in the back of my mind, like, I knew I needed to get my crap together kind of thing, but I just couldn't, because I felt like I was already at such a low point that there was no way that, like, I could get out of this, that there was no way that I'd be able to feel okay again, and that I'd be able to feel all right again. So I was kind of just, like, in this funk for a long time. And, I would look at these things around me, like, I would look at, I don't know, even, like, the couch, or, like, my bed, or my desk, and, they were once filled with, like, normal memories about, just studying there, or just sleeping there, or my couch would just be somewhere I would hang out. But after that incident, I just no longer felt safe. I would, like, sit on my couch, or my room or whatever, and I just felt like it was a place that I no longer could feel comfort in. And that's crazy to say, because it's like, this is your home, you know? This is the one place where you should feel okay in. And even now, you know, I'm dealing with a little bit of trauma, and I'm trying to, like, get through it myself, but I was really just trying to, you know, process everything, and I was really just trying to feel okay again. But no matter what I did, or no matter, you know, where I turned to or who I turned to, like, I felt like I would never really be okay again. And it just made my skin crawl. Like, I remember feeling so repulsed and so disgusted with myself and the way I was feeling, and it was just like, everywhere I went, it was just, I felt like I was no longer this perfect person. This idea that I built up in my head that, you know, you're this incredible student, you're doing all these incredible things, it meant nothing because I threw it all away. And even though I knew that was on me, and, you know, that was my responsibility, and that was something that I kind of took upon myself, like, I still felt like, in a way, it was like, this is all your fault. You know, you ended up here, you made these decisions, so you have no one to blame except for yourself. And all these feelings that you're feeling of, like, discomfort or anxiety or whatever, you're the one who made it this way. And it was this really toxic cycle. And I think at this point, I had completely lost sight of everything around me. Like, school and the organizations I was once in, and, you know, the passions I was in, or, like, the passions that I had, and just everything I was doing with executive organizations, with dance, with clubs and everything, like, I had lost sight of it. And the places and the people that I once found solace in, or found a sense of comfort in, I no longer could. And it honestly just felt like everything was meaningless at this point. Like, everything I did just meant nothing. And no matter how hard I tried to get my old life back, or, you know, this idea of perfection again, or whatever, I just never could. I could never get back to that place, and I could never make people see me in the same light that they once did. And I felt like, because I couldn't do that, because, you know, I was no longer an inspiration to these people, I was no longer this role model for them, that there was no point in almost like my existence. That's really daunting and really scary to say, but honestly, yeah, like, that's how I felt. Yeah, so during this time, I just, with everything that was happening at home, I made a really stupid decision to kind of run away. The logistics of that is kind of weird. A lot of it was due to me, like, leaving my own home just because I no longer felt safe because of a lot of things that had happened there. But also, like, just complexities here and there. But point is, I was not at home anymore. And things definitely got out of hand. And for the entirety of October of 2024, I just lived with friends. I was without a home for about a month, and I was hopping from house to house. And this was a huge, huge shift for me, because I realized that, you know, instead of worrying about the next deadline or the next IO or the next assignment, like, or the next 5,000 word essay that I have to do, right? Like, I'd be worrying about, what am I going to eat at the end of the night? Where am I going to stay? Where am I going to sleep? Am I going to be okay? And would I have enough savings for the next days? Like, how would that work? So, you know, instead of worrying about things like classes, or, you know, just day-to-day things that a normal teenager would have to worry about, I was worrying about basic living needs. And even though I knew I had put myself in that position, I felt like that was more okay than being at home, with just everything that I was going through. But due to this, like due to my living situation at the time, it just put me deeper into this hole of like depression and just anxiety and just not knowing what to do with myself. And at this point, right, like if we're talking about perfection or this ideal life, I'm like so far from it, right? I'm like literally living on the streets. So I felt like I completely lost myself. I didn't even know who I was anymore. You know, this inspiration, this role model idea that people had set up for me, this pathway to success, like it was just simply not there anymore. And I had no idea, you know, if I would ever end up at that place again, if I would ever find a sense of peace with myself again. And yeah, like it was really, really hard. But somehow, you know, I made it a priority to go to class every single day. Like I made it a priority to be there. And even though I was like house hopping quite literally and I didn't have a home for like about a month, I went to school because of that same reason why I started everything I did. You know, for that same reason why I joined all these executive organizations, for the same reason why I joined IB in the first place, to exude this idea of perfection. And I think for a moment, it made me feel normal. Like even though I didn't have a home during that time, and even though, you know, I was like so far from this idea of like a role model student, just being able to sit with my peers for a moment and just being able to feel like everyone else, I felt okay. And, you know, I could like joke around about whatever. I could just joke around about the next class or be like, hey, that teacher's class, oh my God, I felt like I was going to fall asleep. For those of my friends watching, you know who probably. But yeah, despite being like mentally and physically exhausted from my classes, in those moments, those were one of the few moments in the days where I was just able to focus on what was in front of me and just live and just be okay. And that was the only way that I was able to really survive during that time. And, you know, like considering I was living each day in like literal survival mode, like, oh, what would I eat at the end of the day? Or like, where would I stay? Like, where would I sleep? Like, am I gonna have enough clean clothes? Like, considering I was straight up in survival mode, for the 6 hours of the day that was school, I was just able to be okay. And I was able to focus on what was literally just in front of me, like quite literally in front of me. Like I was able to focus on the next Shakespeare thesis or analysis or whatever, or the next IO that was coming up, or whether or not I would have a history debate coming up about like Stalin and Mussolini or whatever. For 6 hours of the day, I was able to feel okay. So yeah, that is our third part. So for a long time, you know, during the 6 hours of the day, during, you know, my day-to-day school life, I was able to feel okay. But I think as the days progressed and as I saw the relationships around me, you know, continue to crumble, I wasn't living at home at this time, so obviously my relationship with my family was like in the gutter. I think this facade really started to hit in of like, yeah, I am not this perfect person. And these kind of illusions that I build around me, I realized I don't know if I'm ever going to be perfect again. Not saying I ever really was. You know, I was definitely super overwhelmed during that time, but I felt like I definitely had my crap more together than I was now, like, in these moments. And, you know, I would pretend everything was okay, but in truth, things were really horrible. You know, I carried on with my school life as if nothing had happened. But, you know, I would join, like, executive meetings in McDonald's, and I just pretend, like, you know, I'm grabbing a quick bite to eat, and I'm so sorry, I'm just on a tight schedule, like, but no, like, it was 'cause I didn't have a place to stay. And during these times, like, I realized I was really lost, and I felt really alone. And, even though I had these people around me that were looking out for me and that still cared, because in a sense, I kind of knew, my parents, they still want the best for me, and they just wanted me to come home. And my friends at the time, I'll never forget it. I remember one day I was feeling really sick, and I was feeling really overwhelmed, and during this time, I was just meeting with police nonstop, or what's it called? Child Protective Services, or security, or whomever, right? I was so overwhelmed. I was at my breaking point. They made this they got me this Tim Hortons gift card. It was actually very, very sweet, and on it they put a bunch of these little puns and jokes and little sticky notes and whatever, and that made my day. That's something I'll genuinely never ever forget. But despite these amazing friends and this amazing community that I built for myself and that I kind of knew had my back, I still felt really alone in these moments. And that's nothing to do with them, and that's everything to do with me, but I just felt so lost. And during this time I coped with all of this with very unhealthy coping mechanisms. I won't really get into it, but you can probably think yourself, because those were the few times that I could just forget about everything. And even though I knew they weren't healthy and I knew they weren't good for me, I just continued to do it because I was I'd rather feel nothing than have to deal with all of these emotions I'm feeling right now, or deal with everything that's on my plate right now. And crap just kept getting worse. Everything just kind of crumbled around me. And I remember during this time there were so many frequent visits. I was constantly at the police station, or consultations with social workers, or barely avoiding a legal battle even at this point. And I broke. 100% I broke. I didn't know what to do with myself, and I could no longer put on this facade that I was okay. And I mentioned earlier in part 3 that 6 hours of the day that I still persisted and I still went to school, I felt okay. That feeling of okay, and that feeling of comfort, and that feeling of just feeling something, was again just slowly going away. And it was just this constant cycle of just wanting to feel something again, wanting to feel okay again. And I couldn't find it in being this perfect role model student. I couldn't find it when I was at my lowest point. So when was I ever going to be happy? And I realized that, I was feeling this same feeling of emptiness, but on a much larger degree, because I felt so alone during this point. And I knew it because I remember this really specific moment. I was sitting in class. I even remember the class. It was biology. And I was sitting in class, and I was completely derealizing. And I'd look at my peers around me. I'd look at my friends, and I would see them, and I'd be like, wow, they really have their crap together. They'd be looking at the board, they'd be taking their notes and whatever, and I would look at them and I'd be like, oh, they're taking notes, or oh, they're looking at the board, oh, I have to do that too. And I'd be writing notes, but I wouldn't even really be writing them. I'd just be scribbling onto my papers, and I was writing complete nonsense. And the reason why I did that, and I know this might not make sense to a lot of people, but I would look at my peers around me, and I would look at the students around me, and I'd be like, okay, they have their crap together. These are the things that they're doing that make them seem this way. Oh, they're looking at the board. Oh, they're writing down notes. Oh, I should do this too. And it was back to this constant cycle of, let me portray this illusion that everything's okay. Let me portray this illusion that, I'm this perfect role model student. And these are the things that my friends are doing. So therefore I should do them too. And even though I was scribbling nonsense, crap onto my page, I was if I do this, I'll seem perfect. If I do this, I'll seem okay. And again, I was just stuck in this cycle of like, what am I doing? Like, I felt like in these moments, I was just acting out my own life. And like, I was completely derealizing. And it just felt like my life wasn't really my own at all. Like, I was just acting out my day to day. And I really just felt like I was almost this like body in a room. And I was just like performing. And that's when I realized I feel like that's all I've ever really done in life. I feel like all I've really done in life is just perform and just kind of just get by. And I kept doing things for others, but with the completely wrong intentions. Like, yes, I had my own passions. Yes, I had my own goals. Yes, I had things that I wanted to strive for. But was I ever really doing them all for myself? Or was I just doing them because I thought these were the things that people would see, and these were the things that people would look at and say, wow, she's got her crap together, or wow, that's a really good student, that's a really good daughter, that's who I want to be. And I realized I'm not doing this for myself at all. I'm not doing these extracurriculars, these passions or whatever for myself. And yes, I enjoyed doing them maybe initially, but as I continued and as I grew, like, I wasn't doing these passions for myself. I was doing them for other people. And that was something that I just couldn't really come to terms with. And I remember, I actually wrote this down. I had a conversation with a friend, and I don't think I'll ever forget what she said. And it really brought me back down to reality. And even though, yes, it came off as harsh, it was something that I definitely really needed in that moment. And she told me in one point in her life that I was her inspiration. And I thought to myself, like, wow, I'm someone's inspiration. I'm someone's someone. Like, I am someone that someone was able to look at one point and say, she's got it. But even knowing that, I didn't feel okay. And, she started to go on by saying, it seemed like I was doing the impossible. It seemed like I was, I had everything together. Like, I was in clubs, so many clubs, executive organizations. I was dancing, and I still made time for my friends outside of school too. But that she felt like, looking at me now, that I had lost my spark. And that really hit home for me, because I felt like, oh wow, like, I had that spark at that point. I had that spark at one point. Where did it all go? And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I couldn't fathom that at one point I was someone's inspiration and I was someone that they looked up to, and I simply just threw it all away. And looking at the person that I was in that moment, I felt like a complete mess. Like, I felt like I'd thrown it all away just to feel something, just for a moment. And that person, their words, like, even though, in the moment it hurt me a lot, it also motivated me to be better. And it motivated me to make a change in my life. So I realized, like, the life that I was living, even though it made me happy for a little bit, reality kind of set in. And reality had set in at that moment. And I kept chasing for more and more, and I wanted to be better and better. And, I realized in that moment, like, I don't need to be someone for someone else when I can simply just be myself. And I realized in that moment that I was okay with that. I didn't need the approval or praise from anyone else. I didn't need all these materialistic things. I didn't need academic validation. I didn't need, to be this perfect role model or this amazing student or whatever the heck it was at that moment, right? That I could just be me, and that people would be okay with that. And I know that's super cliche to say, but, I really wanted to make a change. And I realized I kept chasing for more, but I just looked around me in that moment and I said, I thought to myself, like, why am I chasing for more? Why am I chasing for that 101% when I already have so much in front of me? I have a beautiful support system. I have friends that care about me. I have a family that loves me. That's all I really need. Like, I had a wonderful support system, and I had people that I cared about, and, passions. And I was building myself to be this ideal role model because I just assumed that's how things always should be. That's how I grew up. Like, you always go at 200%. You always go at 101%. You're always living life to the fullest, living like you don't have the next day. Because, that's how it always was. But that's not how it should be. And for a moment, like, things kind of clicked in my brain that I'm okay just as is. And that's when things really started to take a shift. And I started doing things for myself. So going into the last part now, throughout my life and throughout this podcast, I've been saying, I kind of tried to mold myself into the ideal Asian immigrant child. I sought for academic success and materialistic values and obsessions and all these different things, joining these executive organizations, being in these clubs, almost as a shield from not only my parents' expectations, but the expectations of society and the expectations of just the people around me. And like I said earlier, like, no one was holding me at gunpoint, but I just felt like I always had to strive to be better, just so that I could validate all the crap that I'd been through. Because if I didn't make myself into someone, if I didn't make my mark in the world, then all the trauma and all the hardships I went through, they would just be trauma and hardships. They would just be a load of steaming crap, right? And it wouldn't be worth it. But if I could somehow prove myself, and if I could somehow make my mark in this world, then that would have validated all the sacrifices that I had to make. That would have validated all the nights that I stayed up, or all the times that, I didn't prioritize myself, or I put my own happiness aside just to achieve this idea of perfection. And going back to the IB, I joined the International Baccalaureate for my own perceived dream. The dream that, I could be someone someday, and that I could really make a difference in this world. But in doing so, I kind of compromised my own ideals for the approval of others. And that's when I realized, like, was it really all worth it? And a really close friend of mine said to me, something I'll never forget. Like, I actually wrote it down. He said, "Asia, you're selfless. I don't think I've ever met anyone who gets kicked out of a home and the first thing they're thinking about is their next math assignment. But please choose yourself for once." And, that person, me, and I are no longer in each other's life. But to that person, thank you for making me realize that I'm more than just a cog in a machine, and I'm simply just myself. And that's okay too. I really hope that you're doing well and that you're finally safe and you're happy. But during that entire altercation, that person really made me realize that, I really had to make a difference, and I really had to make a change in my life if I wanted to be better. But that's just one thing, right? Saying I want to be better, saying I want to make a difference, saying I want to make a change. That's one thing. Saying it is one thing, but actually doing it and dealing with things face to face and dealing with things head on, that's the part that's hard. So I realized that, dealing with the situation itself wasn't really the hard part. When I was going through everything and when I was at my lowest point, that wasn't the hard part. Because, there was always something new to deal with, whether or not it be finding a place to stay that night, or whether it be, finding a place to sleep, or whatever it might be. That wasn't really the hard part, because yes, my stress was at an all-time high, and yes, my mental health was at its lowest, But because I was so frantic and I was so stressed every day, that was all I could think about. And, you know, dealing with the aftermath was the hardest because it made me realize, like, that's what I actually have to go through this change now. You know, like, saying it is one thing, but now I actually have to deal with my shit head on. And that aftermath and that change that I had to go through, like, was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Granted, I'm only 18, right? So I've only lived a couple years on this earth, but actually taking control of my life was definitely the hardest part, without a doubt. And yeah, I started by apologizing to those that I hurt during this part of my life, where I just took my anger out onto others. I wasn't the nicest to them. I definitely neglected people that really cared for me. I shunned away people that just wanted the best for me in my life and that were simply just concerned. And rekindling the relationships that I had lost along the way was by far one of the hardest parts. And it was weird because as I was doing this, as I was, mending my relationships, as I was, initiating those conversations, during these times, I still felt like I had something to prove. Something to prove that, I wasn't ruined. And I was trying to go so far back and trying to get back to that point in my life where I was perfect. And that I was okay. And that I could still be considered as someone's inspiration. And that I still had that spark in me. And I knew I didn't really have anything to prove, like, no one really cared that much, or like it wasn't that deep kind of thing, but a part of me just wanted to prove that my damage wasn't just damage, and that there was something worthwhile out of it, and that I wasn't ruined, and that I was still okay. And reflecting back on the situation, I won't lie, there's definitely some things that I'm still trying to process and trying to come to terms with. But even though it was one of the hardest moments in my life, do I wish it would have gone another way? Do I wish that I would have continued, living in that cycle of what I thought was perfection, or living in that cycle of, trying to be the best role model ever, working myself to the bone? No, I don't think I regret it, and I wouldn't want that. Because even though I had to go through so much shit to get to where I am today, it's still what made me who I am today. So my counselor told me during the peak of the situation that I had the power to shape my story, and I had the power to come out stronger than ever before. So I clung on to my dreams, and I kept going. And I slowly started to reconnect with the old passions that I had. I slowly started to dance again. The organizations that I was in, by now they had already, ended. But I slowly started to get back into the cycle of things. But the difference was that I was no longer doing it for someone else, but I was just doing it for myself, and only myself. And for once, my life and my future and everything that I tried to pursue was mine. And it was only mine. And that was so nice. That was so nice to feel that, like, I no longer had to cling on to the expectations of others, but for once, everything was just okay. And for once, everything that I had built for and the path to success, it was something that I kind of almost reclaimed, and that it was something that, I could truly be proud of. Yeah. So, all in all, my senior year definitely didn't come without any obstacles. And in some aspects, I feel like a lot of these obstacles still follow me in present day. And I felt like, it became really difficult to just juggle everything at one point. But eventually, I was able to find a sense of peace with myself. And, before I juggled through these issues and through these distractions and whatnot that were disguised as a personal passion of mine or the next big thing. And I joined like 1 billion clubs and multiple executive organizations and competed at university level like competitions and all of that, right? To get this like perfect dream and this perfect ideal. And just to hold, just to almost get this idea of perfection and just strive for the best, whatever perfection may be, right? And for a while, I think, it fooled quite a bit of people. And in the eyes of others, I think for a moment, I can say with confidence that I was an inspiration for people. Or at least that's what I was told, so I don't really know. But I kept trying to add on another extracurricular or join the next big club to distract me from what was truly in front of me. And, what was the perfect life. And I realized, there is no perfect life. And that's why I created Perfectly Untrue. During that moment of my life where I felt like I was the lowest I've ever been, I felt like a fraud, right? And slowly the walls that I built up were crumbling bit by bit. And during my senior year, I was unveiling the parts of my life that was not so pretty, and it was out for everyone on display. And my senior year, right, I had to deal with all of these built up insecurities head on. And I actually had to deal with my shit. And I've only lived 18 years on Earth, so saying it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do is probably pretty stupid. But, I almost ended up losing, and I did lose a lot of respect from people. And I disappointed so many people who I cherished so much. And I held to such high regard. And just knowing I disappointed those people broke me entirely. And, I slowly started to do things for myself again. Because I wanted to make a change. And I tried to get myself out of this mess that I created. And I found myself reconnecting with, the little things that made me the happiest. And slowly, the burdens of senior year were getting a little lighter. And I stopped running away from life. And I just started facing things head on rather than doing it for other people. And I started to live for myself. And honestly, I wish that I could sit here and say that, I found this new epiphany, this is my new life model and I have everything together now. But that is so far from the truth. And, quoting my favorite Disney film, Tangled, life is more tangled than that. It is so crappy. And sometimes life will get you down. And sometimes, it sucks. But you still have to keep going. And despite everything that happened to me, I wouldn't be the person I am today if it weren't for my support system. And if it weren't for those special individuals who made me realize these things, that it's okay to be imperfect. So a little thank you, I guess, to Mr. Mitchell and my dear friends and family who supported me during this time. This episode is dedicated to you. Thank you for making me realize that it's okay to be imperfect and to embrace that imperfection in all its glory and to come out better and stronger than ever. And to my friends and family, I know I don't show it all the time, but I really do appreciate each and every single one of you. And I'm so grateful to have known you. And I hope you know that I notice every little thing. And I need you to know that each action you do doesn't go unnoticed. And I have boundless love for all of you. And I can't stress enough how much you've changed my life. And I'll forever be grateful for that. So I guess here's me trying to say thank you. And to those who are listening, my dear, amazing, lovely listeners, I guess life really doesn't have a clear direction or a clear goal. So my thing is just live. I think you just have to let go of who you think you're supposed to be. In my situation specifically, I just let myself fully surrender. And, I got a huge reality check, and it led to a complete ego death. But know that you can literally do anything. You can be anything. So don't give up and stay persistent, and don't lose sight of what's already ahead, and stay aligned with the version that you know you can be. And you already are. You're just the earlier stages of them, so please trust the process and trust your heart, and stop freaking out about the outcome or the what ifs, or if you're going to lose sight and ponder over the outcome or things that are going wrong, or if you're doubting yourself or whatever. Because if you're already doubting the outcome, then you're doubting the outcome that's in store for you already. So if you know you're going to get there, and you know that you're going to achieve success, and you have that trust in yourself, why even worry at all? Why strive for this idea of perfection when you know that, A, you're never going to get it, and B, it's okay to just live in the moment because you know that you're going to be okay. So my 2 cents of this is just heal your heart, heal your mind, and figure out what it means to be you. Fall in love with that version of yourself and heal. Only then can you ever learn to love yourself. And when you fall in love with yourself, you'll allow yourself not to be mistreated or misunderstood, especially by yourself. And when you love yourself, love will come to you. And when you love you, good will come to you. And with good energy, you'll realize that you're filled with all that intense passion, all that grit, all that joy, love, and all the shit that comes with it. And with good energy, you'll realize that you'll be okay. So go out and kill it, and don't doubt yourself. And just start with you. And from self-love, you can do anything. It's okay to be imperfect. Everyone is. So, this idea of perfection and this idea of being this perfect role model, it doesn't exist. So just make sure that you're okay. And that's all that really matters, is that you have you and you got your back. So don't worry about being perfect. If you're imperfect, that's perfectly okay. And with that wraps up episode 1 of Perfectly Untrue. Thank you so much for listening.